creativity is a foundation in our work in public relations, but it's applicable not just only in the application and industry side of things, but you can be creative on the research side.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella-Williamson.
Hello, and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella-Williamson. This season, our focus is on communication specialties. Today, I'm joined by Karen Freberg. Karen Freberg is a professor in strategic communications at the University of Louisville, where she teaches, researches, and consults in social media strategy, public relations, and crisis communication. Karen has experience working with brands such as Hootsuite, General Motors, Breeders' Cup, Facebook, Adobe, and Chipotle. Karen has written several books, including Social Media for Strategic Communications, Creative Strategies and Research-Based Applications, and Discovering Public Relations. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It is an honor to be here and talking with you today.
Well, I'm really excited to get to know you even better. I've enjoyed interacting with you online, particularly through your Facebook group, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And of course, once you got Mando, he's been around for a couple months now. He's been fun to watch grow. He's so big now. So tell us and our listeners in particular a little more about your background and the work you're doing today.
Absolutely. So in my main role, I'm a professor of strategic communications at the University of Louisville, which I actually just got promoted to a full professor, which I'm very, very excited about. And I've been at Louisville now for 10 years, which is kind of amazing because it doesn't feel like 10 years. And so I came from the University of Tennessee where I did my PhD. And before that, I was getting my master's at the University of Southern California. And I did my bachelor's in PR at the University of Florida. I grew up in California, so my background is kind of all over the place. And I've had a few people ask me, Karen, your experience has been very colorful. Like, how did you go from California to Florida and back to California and Tennessee? And my answer is track and field. I actually was a high school and collegiate athlete in track and field where I threw the shot put. And that was actually really where I got started in my interest in both social media and public relations. And it allowed me to really get an understanding of how to tell your story, personal branding, media relations, and all of that good stuff. So I tell my students I used to throw things for a living, which is both very effective in classroom management, but also from a branding standpoint, my students have actually found some old throwing and competition videos of me on Google. But that's a little bit of my academic background. So when I'm not in the classroom, I try to keep my hand on the pulse of things. So I do some consulting in my free time, and I put free time in quotation marks. And I have a 7-month-old Australian Shepherd puppy named Mando Wade. Absolutely precious. I call him my PTA, my pet teaching assistant. So he's joined me virtually this past semester and will join me again probably in the fall because he loves meeting people and he's very friendly. So that's a little bit about me.
I love so many parts of that. I particularly love Mando's part. Mando is absolutely gorgeous and so cute. And he reminds me a lot of my dog, who is definitely like my chief cuddle officer here at my agency, as well as he and I are a pet therapy team through Pause for Service. So I saw a lot of what you see in Mando in my dog, where I was like, this guy smiles a lot and he's very friendly and loves to be out and about. So he's a great PR dog and wonderful to actually serve the families at Ronald McDonald House Charities with me. So that's part of our service work. So I love that. And it's really interesting that you went from throwing the shot put to getting your start into social media and public relations. You don't hear that a whole lot. So that's an interesting journey. And it leads me to ask, how does your teaching inform your consulting work? And then how does that consulting maybe inform what or how you teach?
That's a great question, Melissa, because I feel it's been really interesting to kind of see the natural relationship that teaching, research, and consulting has. And so just as a little bit of a background, I kind of fell into consulting public relations and social media. So I've always wanted to be a teacher. My mom, who I tell my students she's the original Dr. Freberg, and my dad did marketing. So I felt like I kind of came from an academic family. And I've always loved teaching it. And that was something that I always had kind of a passion for that I wanted to pursue after, my various degrees. But social media was, of course, not really around when I was going through school. And I tell my students, yeah, I remember when Facebook was coming out and grad school. And then before that was MySpace. And they kind of do the puppy head tilt, like, really, Dr. Freeberg? I'm like, I know I'm dating myself a little bit. But I feel that it's just been such a fun field to be in and teaching social media. It's surprising. I've been teaching social media for over 10 years, but I've also had this interesting evolution where when I started kind of really pushing for the need to have a social media class, I got a lot of pushback from a lot of people saying, well, why would you want to do a social media class? It's not relevant. It's a fad. It's going to go away. And, I just felt in my gut, I'm like, it's going to be around. It's something that we need to, master. And so I actually got hired at the University of Louisville they were looking for someone in strategic communications to design and launch a social media class. So that was one of the things that really appealed to me about the position at U of L. So I got to U of L and I realized very quickly that I wanted to design a class that I wish I had as a student, something that would give me hands-on experience. Because as a student athlete, now with the name, image, and licensing initiative that was approved by the NC2A, student athletes can actually make money and do a lot of things with their personal brand. But when I was a student athlete at Florida and Southern California, there was very limited amount of opportunities professionally, that we would be able to do in terms of internships and stuff. So I wanted to design a class that would provide hands-on experiences for my students at the University of Louisville because they were kind of facing a different challenge. A lot of the students are first gen, but they're also paying their own way through school. So they don't have the opportunities to do internships. So I realized very quickly with my social media and public relations classes, I had to bring in real world clients into the classes. And so that was kind of my first kind of real integration with, class clients. And I actually went straight through school. So I think the period of time that I had in between my degrees the most was like 3 weeks. So a lot of people assume that I took like years off to get, consulting and professional experience. And I would tell them no, but I would always do kind of various, consulting projects throughout grad school to, again, get that experience myself because I needed it. And I had a chance to work in South Africa in a fashion consumer PR agency in Cape Town, which that was amazing. And so that gave me some agency experience. And I had a chance here at Louisville to do some speaking engagements, to work with some healthcare brand companies, as mentioned in the introduction. And I realized very quickly that if I was able to take on a few clients at a time during the semester, I'd still keep my hand in the pulse of things. So I don't take more than like one client or two during a year, just because we do a lot of teaching and there's research that needs to be done. So the way in which I integrate consulting within teaching is twofold. One, I feel that it's beneficial for the students to be able to get those contacts as well. So anytime I'm able to bring in networks and consulting opportunities that I've gained into the classroom, it's important to kind of share that with the students to give them experience as well and networking opportunities. But the second part that I really stress too, especially for my fellow educators, is the need to be able to show relevancy in PR and social media. Because if anytime you look at the news or you hear discussions in the industry, I can't tell you how many times, Melissa, I've seen the headlines: universities are not preparing students for the workplace, or you don't need to go to college, all you have to do is watch YouTube videos, or professors just live in their offices and talk about theory all day. And for me, I really stress the consulting just to kind of show students, okay, I'm not someone that lives in my office. Like if I live in my office, then I'm doing something wrong, especially in the PR and social media field. Like the world and learning and practices are happening outside, not in my office. And I feel that having these consulting experiences that tells the students, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm not assigning busy work. I'm not assigning activities that are not, being practiced in the industry, and anything I do in the classroom for my students, I'm doing myself. And I tell my students, I don't expect them to work harder than I do. And just kind of setting that precedent, and kind of that mindset for them in the social media and public relations practice really helps. So I feel that by doing consulting and teaching, it's intertwined. Plus, we are seeing more universities expect more of educators in these various applied fields to have that experience and bring that into the classroom. So that's been an interesting development that I've seen across the board.
I have so much to say about the points you bring up, Karen, because I really believe in what you're doing in your approach. I am all about strategic communication, and that means embracing integration. And for us in full time practice, that certainly means across the different areas of the communication industry, making sure that what's happening in the PR strategy and approach consistent and complements what you're going to do in social media, through advertising, all the way around, right? And I also really am excited to think about your approach in terms of integrating the academic world and theory with application. I've seen that on a smaller scale from some professors, but I think your approach is doing it right, because not only are bringing some kind of project experience to the students and helping them expand their network and getting a taste of industry practice, but you're also doing that consulting work, which is very difficult on top of all the other things you have to do as an instructor and a professor. So that's super incredible. And I love that. And it made me also think about how all of us are racing to try to keep our finger on the pulse of what is happening in the industry. It changes so much. I did not have applied experience as a student in public relations, and here I am. That's my expertise. And I am so happy that you are thinking in that manner of how can I give them more of that hands-on, real-world experience and vantage point early on in their college experience, so that way they can decide which area of communication they may want to specialize in and focus in. And I'm just so excited about all of that. And part of what I have on my heart as a professional is to write a book that bridges a gap between the theory and the practice, what you learn in the textbook and what's actually happening on the ground. And so I am totally in sync with what you're doing. It's so impressive. And writing textbooks for our profession, focusing on social media and focusing on public relations is also super impressive. How did you get into that space and become an author in social media and public relations?
Well, yeah, it's a funny story actually, Melissa, because if you would have told me 10 years ago, like after writing a 300-page dissertation that I would be writing a book, I would just burst out laughing. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But exactly to your point, when I started teaching social media at the University of Louisville, I was using various textbooks that were out there, which there weren't that many. And I kept on exploring around. I'm a big believer of adding to your own personal library. I have like books all over the place in my office, in my home office. And every semester I was teaching social media, I kept getting frustrated to the point where I would look at books, certain ones, and I honestly felt like I was Goldilocks. At one point, I said, one book I have has too much theory in it, not enough practice. And then there's another book that I see, okay, this has a lot of practice, but no details on how to actually apply what they're talking about into a teaching segment. They would say, oh, write a strategic plan on social media. And my question would be like, okay, and how do you go about doing that? You don't walk through the steps. So this happened, this was kind of percolating these frustrations in me for a couple years. And my mom, the original Dr. Freberg, and my dad, again, he's retired. He did marketing for, a lot of food companies back in the day and taught. I was sitting at home one Thanksgiving day and just kind of airing the frustrations out. And I said, there's really no book out there that I feel is, up to what I think should be taught and covered in a book. And so finally, I tell my students, your professors even have parents who kind of tell them, hey, you need to do something. And so finally, my parents were like, Karen, you need to write the book on social media. And my mom is a professor of psychology. She has written her own books and research methods, Introduction to Psychology and Neuroscience. I basically grew up seeing her write textbooks. So I knew kind of the process and also the work that would be asked, of me to do for a textbook. So I knew at that point, this was, again, like 6 or 7 years ago, that I thought, oh, okay, well, I can do that. But the challenge I had at that time was having a publisher that had the vision and confidence that a social media book in strategic communications needed to be written. And so it actually took a while to kind of find the right publisher. And I actually had a colleague, his name is William Thompson at U of L, who basically brought me over to Sage, which is my publisher for both my PR book and social media book, at a conference, and basically told them that they would be absolute fools if they did not sign me right away to write a book. And they were like, okay. So I wrote a proposal for social media and started writing. Basically, I had a year to write the first edition. And the responses, the reviews came back really, really positive. And so it was first published in 2018 and was flying off the shelves. And it was something that I think Sage and I were like, wow, okay, this is really cool. But around that same time, I was approached by Sage to write a PR book. The social media market is a bit different than the PR textbook market. So coming in with a new perspective, I had to kind of embrace that. But what's been really exciting for me, Melissa, with the books is kind of seeing the impact. I mean, that's been my goal as a professor and as a professional in our field, is to make an impact on our field, to change it in some fashion. And so for me, the most rewarding part is not only seeing people like get the book. And I literally teared up the first time that I saw my book at Barnes and Noble. It just kind of hit me right there. And I just felt, okay, looking around, I'm like, okay, if anyone sees that I'm like crying here, this is, going to be an awkward conversation. But it just has been so rewarding to see professors come to me, right, saying, look, I had my best student evaluations after using your book for my social media class, or I have students that have had my PR book that have said, I really want to go into PR now after being in this class and using your book. And I've tried to write both books in the mindset of writing for the students, where I would always kind of ask myself the question as I was writing, how would I be inspired by this book? And I had books in college that I thought, either one, I had to have a thesaurus next to me because they were using complicated vocabulary that was basically proving how smart they were, or they were using case studies that I thought, this is not really interesting. Like, I can't really connect with this. And so I always have tried to kind of think about, what would students be inspired by? What would they be excited about talking to their parents or their family about, like what they're learning in college, but also with the professors, giving them examples that they can tie in that are current, but also relatable to the content. So my approaches have been very different compared to some of the other books out there, but it's been just extremely rewarding to kind of see, the responses, not only here in the US, but seeing my books being adopted in Australia, Bangladesh, Africa, and in Europe. It's kind of amazing. If you would have told me that this would have happened, I would have been like, no way. No way this could have happened. But it's just been extremely, extremely rewarding. And I'm very thankful for everyone who's been supportive of the books over the last few years.
That's incredible, especially having a global impact like that. I think it's very inspiring for us to think about, couldn't find the tool you needed, so you went ahead and created it. And that has really helped both sides of the industry, and it's really helped us bring in the future leaders. And I think a lot of us pros would really benefit from taking a look at those textbooks ourselves. So I'm going to have to add that to my cart pretty soon here. One thing I think is really interesting about you, Karen, and we would not be connected without that. So nice plug for Facebook groups, but you've cultivated a very engaged Facebook group. So I think there's over like 2,000 different professionals and a lot of obviously instructors and professors there. It's called Social Media Professors Community. So y'all look that up if you're into teaching social media. I find as a practitioner, more of a strategist on the social media side, I gain a lot just seeing the different case studies you all share. Tell us how Social Media Professors Community came to life and what inspired you to start that group.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Melissa, for being a great community member and part of SM Profs. I'm very grateful to have you and the amazing professionals who are part of this group. And this group came from a research study, actually. It was back in 2016, I believe. And one of the areas that I do research in actually is in social media pedagogy, which I kind of fell into when I was at the University of Louisville teaching social media. And I realized, well, if I'm teaching social media, I should research it as well as kind of one of my main areas. So that's kind of how I came about doing some pedagogy research. But this study actually was a qualitative research study exploring kind of the opportunities and challenges that social media professors were facing. And I had a chance to talk to this amazing professor. His name is Chris Wilson. He's at BYU. And we were talking about some of the challenges in social media and teaching social media. And he said, Karen, we have so many professional groups for PR, marketing, but there really wasn't a place for professors who teach social media to come together. He said, I need to be with my people. I need to be able to talk to other professors who understand what we're going through and help each other. And honestly, Melissa, the light bulb went off and I'm like, well, why isn't there a community for us? Because I was kind of feeling the same way. We were all over the place at different universities. We were usually alone. There was usually one of us in our department or school that was teaching social media. And I felt we really needed an online community where we could share ideas and activities and best practices, and also let the industry know that we're around. Because at that time in 2016, still a lot of industry groups were not fully aware that social media classes were being taught at universities across the board. So I decided at that time with Facebook, they were really promoting Facebook groups as a function. And so I thought, why not? I'll create a Facebook group called SM Profs for Social Media Professors Community. And I shared it across the board. I said, hey guys, like I created this group where we can all share ideas, assignments, syllabi, help each other out because we're all in this together. After the first day, we had over 100 members. And I realized at that point, oh my gosh, we have something going on here. And it's been growing substantially over the years since then, as more people have realized that this is a group that's inclusive, that is helpful, that you have professors who are willing to share materials. And I stress that as a key point because that was not my experience when I started teaching social media. I was a doctoral student, who just got into her first tenure track job at Louisville. And I thought, okay, I'm being asked to create a social media class. And I had experience at the University of Tennessee to co-teach and design a course. So I kind of had a foundation in that, but I wanted to kind of get a sense of how others were teaching social media. And I had a lot of doors slammed in my face. I had a lot of professors who would say, I want to be known as the social media professor. So if you're going to find, materials, go find it elsewhere. And there were a few that were very supportive of my effort. And I really wanted to create a community where it was proactive in sharing resources and ideas and assignments, because so many times we're seeing so many professors kind of thrust into teaching social media, and it could be extremely overwhelming. And what I've also seen over the last several years is similar to what we've seen with Gen Z and even millennials is from the industry standpoint, they're like, you have agencies or brands looking at these young professionals thinking, oh, you're young, you're digital native. So yeah, you're going to run our social media. And you're kind of getting that in academia as well as, these schools and programs and universities are looking at young assistant professors who just graduated with their PhDs thinking, oh, you're young. So that means you understand social media and that you can teach this. And so they're thrust into that. And so this community is there to kind of walk some of these steps through to say, okay, if you're designing a class from scratch, here's some resources. We can connect you with professors who have done this, who study this, who work on this. And it's been really fun to be able to see how this community has really grown and fostered, not just among professors, but high school teachers who are teaching social media are part of the group. But most importantly, I also wanted to make sure that the industry was involved, whether it's in PR, advertising, agencies, and the platforms. We actually have over 20 people just from Facebook alone who are part of the group. And we have representation from all the platforms involved, including TikTok, Twitter, Snapchat, Google. And we also have professional organizations who are involved, agencies, because I wanted them to see that essentially there are professors out there who are trying to change the field, who are providing value for our students. And to just combat some of the negative perceptions that you do see from universities and professors not teaching the students what they need to know in the industry. So I wanted to give them an open door and welcoming them to the community so they can see for themselves who are the professors at various schools who are trying to prepare students for the future workplace and social media. So we're over, 2,000 members globally. So we have a representation on every continent except Antarctica. Still working on that. But it's been really fun to kind of see everyone helping each other out. It's been a very vibrant and engaging community.
I agree. I would say it's very collaborative in there. Everyone's very supportive. And that's a breath of fresh air from some other communities or groups that may be out there. I like that you have both professionals from the industry, but then those who actually make these channels involved, or at least kind of watching the conversation. That's a common PR strategy, to be in those relationships so that you can benefit each other and then fix whatever may be going wrong or off the track at different times. And in terms of teaching, I think all of these must impact your work. So I thought about it separately, but you're welcome to answer this in an integrated way. Is like, what does your work teaching PR look like? And how do you approach designing that curriculum? Is that different in your approach and how you teach social media? What are things that students really want to dive into on either side?
That's a really great question, Melissa, because I feel that social media and PR are so interconnected. And I learned a lot when I was designing the social media class. And I've taught PR courses when I was doing my doctoral studies at the University of Tennessee. But those courses were very research and theoretically based. And so when I was kind of looking at the PR course that I teach, I realized that I wanted to give my students a balanced perspective of the field, even though it was a graduate course, because at the University of Louisville, our grad program is kind of mixed, where we have some students who want to go on for their PhD. They want to go into research and become a professor. But a lot of our students are in the industry in Louisville who need to retool and reskill their abilities in working in public relations. And so I have a mixed group of those students in class, but then you also add undergraduate students who are able to take the course as well. And so what I've tried to do is, again, have a balanced approach in teaching public relations. So in every lecture that I have a couple of academic readings. Some of the students find that extremely interesting. And then others, they look at me and they're like, Dr. Freberg, this is a lot of theory work. And I'm like, hey, I know you need to understand the foundation. You need to understand how our field has evolved. What are the key principles? What are the key approaches that are used in analyzing public relations? But the way in which I describe this to my students is you need to understand how things work and not reinvent the wheel. But at the same time, I also make sure in every lecture that I have applicable readings, exercises, activities, and case studies that tie in what we've covered in the theories. Because I tell my students, look, if Godzilla is going to walk towards downtown Louisville for the Kentucky Derby, I'm not going to ask what theory I'm going to use here. I'm going to go into action here. Like, okay, here's what we need to do to combat Godzilla. So it's important for the students to get that applicable experience as well. So I cover foundations, and again, the theory, the research. Then I go into applicability, exercises and activities. And then the third part of the class kind of with self-reflection, like what were some of the takeaways the students got? What are some things that they can think about for future classes that they're going to be taking? But also that is a time for them to spark creativity and innovation, where they kind of see the applicability of some of these concepts in the research and how can they come across with new ideas, new approaches, new ways of explaining some of these concepts for their work or for their internship or their job, or even coming up with new research questions. because I feel that creativity sometimes is limited. People assume that creativity is only happening in marketing and advertising, but creativity is a foundation in our work in public relations, but it's applicable not just only in the application and industry side of things, but you can be creative on the research side. So I really try to stress that out in the classes and how I approach PR. So it's a little bit different than most graduate PR courses, but I feel that I've kind of blended in what I've learned from all three of my programs: Florida, Tennessee, and USC. And USC was a very professionally applied focused program, but Tennessee was a very strong research program. So I really kind of, I guess, if Tennessee and USC had a child, this would be my class, essentially.
That made me laugh so much here. I got a little hot just thinking about the idea that creativity is not in PR. I'm like, creativity is everything in public relations. It is everything in what I do all day long. In fact, I got into public relations from a background of being a creative writer in high school and college and a poet and looking for a stable career to marry all these different creative skills I had in photography and writing and design thinking. And public relations really been a big part of filling those needs I have. But a number one job component in public relations is really being a problem solver. And so if there's nothing else creative about it, being a good problem solver is well served by being a creative person and looking for solutions. So a lot of talk about teaching, a lot of talk about how the student perspective and how everything works together. What should a communication practitioner, someone in public relations, social media, advertising, marketing, any side of that house, what should they know if they're considering becoming either an adjunct instructor or maybe someone who's thinking about transitioning into academia full time?
I'm really excited about this question because I definitely feel that we need more practitioners to really consider either being an adjunct or kind of transition into the role of a professor, because we need you all to be perfectly honest. And I know that this might be definitely kind of a different view than some of my other academic colleagues, but I feel that the field is moving so much where you have to have kind of a balanced perspective between research and theory, and you have to have that experience to really connect with the students. And I feel that that is something that I would strongly encourage everyone who's listening, who's ever thought about, well, I might be teaching or I might want to kind of pursue a PhD and stuff. And I would say that if you're pursuing both, whether it's an adjunct or a PhD, realize that you have a huge amount to offer to both your students, but also the academic field. But also do not be intimidated by academia. Academia, as I've learned, definitely has certain roots that, kind of hard to move around. When I first came to the University of Tennessee for my PhD, I literally felt I was Elle Woods from Legally Blonde, because I just came back from working in fashion public relations in South Africa from California, and I just felt completely out of place. It took me a year to really figure out I do belong here. And, don't be intimidated by the research obligations or the theories that, a lot of professors throw around, but realize that you have a lot of professional experience, and anyone can learn theory, anyone can learn research, but having those skill sets and being able to apply those theories into practice takes creativity and strategy and experience. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But also, I would say we're entering an interesting time in higher education where you are seeing actually some new roles at various schools being launched called professors of practice, where you can actually get into various roles like an associate professor or even full professor of practice based on your experience. And that is something that I think is really exciting. I've been advocating that we need a lot of that in our professions. And so there's schools that have already kind of embraced that. You see that across the board at other public relations programs, but we're also seeing that in social media as well. And universities are realizing that they need to have this kind of new approach where you have to have experience, but you also have to have research. So the days in which you just do research are kind of numbered as a professor. There are some programs that absolutely, there are some professors that just do research, but that's not for all the programs that are out there. Like you have to have an intermixture of teaching, research, practice, and service. So the opportunities are really there. And so if you're going the PhD route, I would really look long and hard at the PhD programs that you're looking at because you want to make sure one, you'll be mentored. You also want to look at where the graduates are. Do they have jobs? I mean, honestly, if you don't want to necessarily put yourself through a PhD program and not get a job afterwards, but also you want to kind of see where do you want to go with your teaching? What classes do you want to teach? What are some areas that you would really be passionate about in covering in a program? And I've been very fortunate to be able to teach and work in a department that's been very supportive, very accommodating, and allowing me to teach the classes that I'm passionate about and being able to do my best work. So, you want to go into a program that is very receptive and open and appreciative of your experience as a practitioner, because there are some programs that are not receptive to that, which is a shame because I feel that practitioners have so much value. I'm always excited when I see and meet professionals in the industry who want to go and teach in academia. I'm like jumping up and down because I'm like, yes, you know what we're talking about. You know what's relevant and key for our students to really embrace about PR and social. So I'm always excited to see new colleagues join academia. And if anyone is interested, I'd be more than happy to jump offline or even schedule a chat through Zoom to chat more about this, because I feel that teaching is one of the most rewarding jobs out there. Like the ability to be able to make an impact in someone's lives and change it is just priceless. It's absolutely priceless. And one of the things that I absolutely love being a professor.
Well, that's really generous and encouraging of you, Karen. I taught mass communication as an adjunct and kind of dipped my toes in those water. And I also found it very rewarding. I also found it great for my practice in terms of I had all these young people that I could ask questions to and get their feedback on and realize, gosh, they don't even really watch cable. This was a couple of years ago, right? And I was thinking about cutting the cord. Like, this is how they approach social media. This is how they approach mass media. So I thought that was great. And I brought that into my agency work right away. But yes, I found it very overwhelming. And I did feel like I was out on my own. And I had the head of the department like co-teach with me and let's reshape this curriculum together. Because as a practitioner, I was pretty much arguing with the textbook content constantly in my head. And so I had a hard time feeling like I was serving the students well when I really knew that some of the information in there was outdated as far as how we approached radio and TV and whatnot. So I love this idea and the embracing of professors of practice. And that's something that I will also advocate for as well on behalf of everyone involved in education. I think that's a really important part of the ecosystem that's missing for us to do better in the workplace and bridge some of this gap. So awesome stuff there. Well, I like to ask all my guests, and you're a smarty, so I think I'm very interested in your answer. But what does smart talk mean to you?
I would say the smart talk means being skilled in various situations and being adaptive to answer and articulate and educate amongst diverse situations and circumstances. And what I mean by that is it kind of brings back to the point about, you mentioned the textbook. I have regular arguments. I don't keep them just in my head. I voice them with my students sometimes, because I believe there's street smart activities and then there's book smart, right? When you're looking at smart talk, it's about having a complete comprehensive view of any given situation. So that's kind of where I feel with my consulting, I bring to the table where I can talk about the research that's been done. For example, I've done a lot of projects over the last couple of years on influencer marketing. And I've done research in influencer marketing. And I know the body of literature in influencer marketing. So I'm able to bring forth that insight into my consulting. But at the same time, I'm able to bring forth the street smart saying, okay, here's kind of how we approached it, this particular campaign, but here are the lessons learned. How does this tie back to research, et cetera? So I think with Smart Talk, it's about utilizing your intelligence, experience, and expertise to be adaptive in the various situations and circumstances that you're in, while also being adaptive and being open to the possibility that your experience, your insights and research and your experience in the industry can evolve and grow throughout the time. So it's not just something that like kind of stays static, but it's something that evolves over time as you gain more education, experience, meeting new people, etc. So that's kind of how I would envision Smart Talk to be.
Absolutely. That's a very smart answer, Karen. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I'm inspired to look more into the academic field myself. But what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you after the show?
Absolutely. I'd love to connect with anyone who's interested in chatting all things social, PR, education. And if you want to talk about, Australian shepherds and puppies, I'm also available to do that. So I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. If you just search Karen Freberg on LinkedIn, you'll find me. I'm at K Freberg, KFREBERG, pretty much on all social. I tell my students I'm even on TikTok, and they're like, oh my gosh, our professor's on TikTok. And I'm like, hey, gotta be. I do have a website and blog, just KarenFreberg.com and KarenFreberg.com/blog. And my email address is just Karen.Freberg@Louisville.edu. And again, I want this to be a jumping off point, and I'd love to continue the conversation, help out in any way I can, because we're all in this together. Like social media PR is all about learning and growing with each other. And we're all in the same page of helping each other understand and kind of evolve the field to the next level. Because at the end of the day, we need to prepare the future generation for what they need to know and be prepared for beyond what we're going to be doing.
Absolutely. I'm all with you on that, Karen. Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Melissa, for having me. It's been a great conversation, and thank you for everything that you're doing in the field. It is very impactful and wonderful, and I love being able to showcase it with SM profs and even in my own students.
Thanks to our listeners for joining us for today's episode. We love diving deep into communication topics to elevate our industry practice. What topics should we explore next? Email your topic or guest ideas to melissa@smarttalkseries.com. And since we all know growth is really important, do me a favor and share the podcast or a favorite episode with your colleagues. Your referral or share online is all the thanks we need to keep going. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.